Hello everybody. Let's continue with our topic for today on the context of Roman declamation. Culture in Roman declamation. From forum to boardroom. From your lecturer, Marcus Romo. All this content is based on different sources from Roman declamation, but mainly from the introduction to Roman declamation by Mr. Mario Lentano, a new cultural and anthropological perspective. We are adapting this in order for this information can help us to create speeches, increase our rhetoric, our culture and backgrounds on Roman declamation to craft better spirit of the laws, of the texts, of our writings and our speeches based on several greatest authors on Roman declamation that we have been reviewing, like Alpurnius Flaccus, Quintilian, Cicero, etc. Let's begin. Let's begin as usual with our welcome meditation in order to ground ourselves, set up the context, awaken a little bit within, open up our mind, calm our emotions, our senses, and connect with the signal of the Roman declamation, the declamators, that ancient time where everything was possible within the characters and themes of the Roman declamation that we reviewed last session. So, said this, let's begin. The living forum, a welcome meditation for the topic of today, culture in declamation. Let's step a little bit around ourselves. Remember your grounding. Say hello to your fellow Roman declamators. Be comfortable behind your eyes, at the center of your head. Let's open up our intuition, our Roman declamators, spirit guides, which all our intuition and ideas came from. Let's set up the body. Let's open our forum. Sit upright. Feel grounded. Ground your feet. Let your hands rest lightly on your lap. Let's close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in and breathe out through the mouth for 4 to 6 times. Feel the walls around you fade into an open sky of Rome, the song warm stone of the Tiber River. Hear the multitude. Imagine you stand beneath Rome's basilica arches. To your left, a free woman bargains over grain prices. To your right, a senator dictates a decree. Foreign merchants argue tariffs in clear Greek. A slave boy hums a provincial lullaby. Every accent, every rhythm fills the air like a living mosaic throughout the city, our Rome Sophistopolis. Some hidden voices. Let four figures step forward, each bearing a strand of Rome cultural tapestry. The immigrant merchant, who fears new taxes, yet trusts the promise of Roman roads. All the roads lead to Rome, remember. The patrician daughter, who studies rhetoric in secret, hungry for a voice beyond the atrium. A veteran legionary, scared by distant wars, unsure where loyalty ends and longing begins. With problems with his sons, with his wife, the stepmother of his sons, and remembering the pirates that he defeated on the Mediterranean coasts. Greet each of them silently. Notice the emotions they carry, the ambition, the anxiety, the pride, the knowledge, the sorrow. Hold their stories for a heartbeat within you. That let that characters awaken the experience of Roman declamation within you. Intuition, imagination, the creativity. Intuitive, look within. Ask yourself, which voice do I understand least? Breathe into this discomfort. In Roman declamation, every unheard story is a blind spot in judgment, a little bit of violence, perspectives. Mastered is a new lens for leadership, for new rhetoric, for new writings, for new speeches. 2. Pitch an audience, or to enlighten the boardroom with your knowledge. Which voice do I understand the least? Remember. And step into leadership. Let's set an intention. Speak for the city, whisper inwardly. May my rhetoric recognize every accent, confront every prejudice, honor every dignity. Imagine your words becoming a bridge between the Tiber, where class, and origin meet without fear. Let's return with humanitas. Inhale once more, drawing the multitude into your lungs. Exhale gently, releasing bias, opening your eyes to the reality. Classroom, the forum, has become your modern place. The diverse city still hums beyond its doors. Carry the voices you met, let them guide each argument you craft for today. Welcome to our content for today. Culture in Roman declamation. May our speech give shape to the silent and breadth to the narrow. Forgive unity from difference, as Rome once strove, and as we must strive again. Remember, to declaim is to awaken. Students, please do not be deceived. These are not just ancient names and dusty laws and empty words. Behind Calpurnio, Cicero, Populus, Cato, every daughter unboring her brotherly bones, the Virfortis, there is a question waiting for you. What will you do when justice and law no longer agree, as we see every day in our today's world? What will you say when silence is the easier path? What will you say when silence is the norm? Would you weep like the father accused of madness? Will you stand like the son who walks into death so that that city may live? In this room, we do not just rehearse arguments, as you can see. We explore the soul of our civilization. We touch the fire of duty, betrayal, loyalty, violence, sacrifice, truth. Because to declaim is not to act, it is to awaken. The ancients left us the dilemmas, but the courage to face them must be yours. So speak like a Roman, speak like a human, concerned to develop your leadership, rhetoric, oratory skills, with honor, with depth, with a fearless spirit of your texts, clarity of one who dares to think, who embraces new topics, who is open to all that culture and cultural memory about Roman declamation can bring us. Because in the end, only those who learn to speak can truly learn to lead. Return to the present, stretch a bit, open your eyes, your mind, your soul, your chakras, to the creativity of Roman declamation. For today, we are reviewing the culture in declamation with some excerpts and explaining them so you can grasp the ideas, the concepts like canto notturno, the astrologer, the mathematicus, and the declamation minoris and maiores. In public, a father follows his luxurious son, crying. He is accused of dementia. This is the theme of Pseudo-Quintilian's Minor 316, a controversy that has been examined within a recent study of the meaning of dementia in school rhetoric and its connection to juridical reflection, and indeed a sermon that is a sort of commentary that often accompanies or is interspersed in the text of a declamation or even in the substitute for it, lingers on this point. I would like to draw your attention to these passages where we seem to hear the voice of the teacher as a declamator, orator, as he speaks to you students in a lesson as the one for today, culture in Roman declamation. I do not want to criticize me because I do not give you space for practicing loci communes. If you want to span declamation and use your creativity, you can add elements that do not relate in any way to the case at hand, but that perhaps contribute to the audience enjoyment. The text continues in the voice of the accused father. I have not yet provided specific personal reasons for my tears, but who should be surprised that a grown man weeps? Infancy begins from tears, and often fate puts us in the condition of crying. But day does not present us with something sad and woeful. Even if every other reason for crying is lacking, the sight of other men and consideration of our morality are sufficient to provoke tears. Relations of friendship and of family, encounters, feelings, and successes, all in a short space of time coming to nothing and slip away. And what day passes without seeing a funeral from a friend, a beloved one, or something terrible that we hear from the violence all around the world with their constant wars. Roman declamation is not for hiding away, it's for embracing that harsh truth, harsh present, and fight it, embrace it like the Bill Fortis, like the honor's father, the honor's son, the honor's daughter. Reflections like this are a good example of the philosophical coloring that often tinges Latin declamation and represents a point of contact with other texts that precede the period of Quintilian. For example, the topos of human life that begins from weeping, which extends as its far canonical end to Leopardin in his Canto Notturno, can be found in Lucretius and Pliny the Elder. In the opening of his famous book on man, while the image of daily funerals that remind us of the precarity of the human condition pervades Seneca's Consolation and Marciam. So, this, the relation of school rhetoric to philosophy, Roman declamations to philosophy, is a field of research that remains only partially explored by scholars and is certainly promising. Positions such as that of Charles Garin, according to whom declamation casts philosophical discourses as completely foreign to its interests, or even likely to harm the literary pleasure that comes with the practice of controversy, do not seem to be substantiated by detailed analysis. Indeed, philosophical digressions are presented by Pseudo-Quintilian as capable of increasing the audience delectation. After Michael Winterbottom's Bottom's discussion of the subject, important studies have been produced by Andrea Balbo on Calpurnius Flaccus, that we will be reviewing, by Lucia Passetti in reference both to declamations minores and to the mayores, a collection that in its extent and high level of literary refinement lends itself to such a study, and most recently by Gernot Krappinger and Thomas Zinsmeier and Professor Martin Linter. Recurrent motifs include the question of divine providence, and closely connected, that of the value of divination, and more generally of the entire apparatus of oracles, predications, spells, and wonders that pertain to the field of the fantastic in declamation. So, as you can see, we are entering the fantastic world in declamation, also lending themselves to philosophical reflection, are those controversies in which an inspired suicide, in homage to principles of scholastic jurisprudence, argues his reason to the Senate under penalty of being denied burial. In this respect, we can identify in Pseudo-Quintilian's material numerous points of contact with the text of Seneca. The two themes converge in the fourth Major, the astrologer, where the defense of the providentiality of the world and of the credibility of divination is used to justify the Vir Fortis request to commit suicide after the Mathematicus, who appears in the title of the declamation, has prophesied that he will kill his father. Now you can see we're entering into a great arena, fantastic, the divination, astrology, the future. What then of this awesome spectacle of the brilliant stars? Some shine as though they are fixed to the sky, and of a piece with it in enchanting positions that they have taken up once for all, the famous stars that are fixed season by season, while others scatter all over the heavens. Trace out wandering courses, erratic yet predetermined. Did you imagine all these things were set in order, at random or by chance? I ask you, how could reason have done any better? God? Yes, you may say. God, the maker of the whole immiscible structure, drew these things forth from the primordial shapeless darkness, and gave them an appearance, dividing them up into parts. As you can see, we're entering into concepts, divination of stars, of God, creation. Here, the appeal to reason as the ordering principle of the universe betrays the Stoic cast of pseudo-Quintilian work, and indeed Stoicism does dominate the philosophical landscape of school declamation. By contrast, in the 10th Major, where a son who has died ante diem continues to appear to his mother until his father has his tomb enchanted by a mash. Patrick Crakelund recognizes echoes of Epicurean philosophy, especially its attack on beliefs about the afterlife and its affirmation that the dead have no sensation and thus no possibility of enjoying the manifestations of grief. Finally, M. Passetti has called attention to controversies featuring the figure of the cynic philosopher, especially Minor 283. If adherents of this philosophical school are often subjected to aggression or derision in the Greek context. In our Roman declamation, Latin themes appear in which cynics are taken to task for choices that contradict Roman mores. There is also generally the traditional Roman indifference to purely speculative activity, expressly claimed as an identity trait in Minor 283. But in the case of cynic philosophy, this argument is accompanied more specifically by an aversion to choices that deliberately flout dominant models of living and values. All told, the case of cynicism remains isolated. In the school controversies, explicit references to this or that teaching are in fact rare, and the positions of the declaimers do not seem to embody any specific system of thought. Philosophers, when they appear, are above all a mechanism for navigating out of the often narrow boundaries of some situations. As for example, in Seneca's Controversia 7.6, how the father has given his daughter in marriage to an ex-slave and who is thus accused of dementia by his son. Albusius also spoke philosophically. He said that no one is a slave and no one is free by nature, and that fate imposes these labels on each person. You know the rest, he added, that we too were once slaves, and he recalled the case of Servius Tullius. The motive echoes a well-known Stoic principle expressed by Seneca in a memorable formulation, but the trope occurs in declamation in relations to many different topics. This is a locus communis in a technical sense, belonging to those standard argumentative formulations used by the rhetoricians, who drew on them like a reservoir in the most diverse circumstances, and owing their name to their adaptability on subjects such as the mutability of fortune, contempt of death, the eternity of glory, condemnation of wealth, and praise for virtues. poverty or wealth. Hence, the often merciless judgments that have been pronounced on declamatory philosophy. Antonio Stramaglia has actually spoken of doctrinally superficial snippets of skill. We would like to suggest a different interpretation of such philosophical insertions into declamation philosophy. Antonio Stramaglia has actually spoken of doctrinally superficial snippets of skill, but insertions into declamations. However, in the first place, they confirm school rhetoric as a genre that is capable of drawing on the most diverse expressions of culture. It's an extraction of culture. When you start writing your speeches, your declamations, try to extract the culture of a given place. The problemata philosophomena, as Seneca the Elder called them, belong very specifically to a widespread patrimony of knowledge shared by the educated classes, and as such expected to be learned and deployed at opportune moments by speakers in training. We are in training. Let's extract some cultural ideas and bring them into our declamations. Furthermore, and the point is closely related, these snippets of skill, as Stramaglia called them, operated on a level we could call meta-communicative, in the sense that they aim to reassure the consumers of the discourse that the orator and his audience speak the same language, share the same codes, and are joined by possessions of the same cultural baggage. More than contributing to clarification of the controversy in question, they provide information about the orator, contributing to his authoritative image and characterizing him as a member of the same educated elite to which the judges also belong. What is more, in Roman declamations there are examples of rhetoricians whose strong theoretical vocation eventually result in a decision to leave the classroom to take up philosophical speculation. This is the case of Papyrus Fabianus, a vigilant adherent of the schools and then a student of the philosopher Cestius, an author of naturalistic and scientific texts. So the declaimer Papyrus did not spurn the loci communes of traditional philosophy, which were then reprised by Seneca the Younger, such as a juxtaposition of man's ferocity and that of animals, who are not aggressive with members of their own species. Among other things, this motive recurred in one of many controversies about abdicatio that we recalled last session. Seneca the Elder, the author of the Declamation Minores, would have deemed in a typical example of philosophical elaboration, aimed only at the pleasure of the audience. Here instead is how Papirius expressed himself in the first Senecan Sosoria to dissuade Alexander from navigating the encircling ocean. Those who have observed the movements of the stars and the alternation of winter and summer, attributing them to fixed laws, who know every part of the universe, nevertheless are uncertain about the surrounding ocean, if it encircles the lands like a belt, or if it gathers in a circle and pours boiling, as if we, immense breadths, in those loops of which navigation takes place, and whether beyond it there is a fire, which it nourishes, or air. It comes as no surprise that at least 3 books on natural causes were attributed to Fabianus, regarding the relation between declamation and the broader cultural imaginary. It is all worth mentioning briefly another point, only partially studied by scholars, that of declamation's connection to historiography, as already clear from the examples given in the preceding chapters. Controversiae and Sosoriae do not necessarily involve fictitious situations or figures of myth. In some cases, they feature figures and events drawn from history. Indeed, in Suetonius' judgment, this was the defining feature of Roman declamation in its most ancient form, whereas in Greece, the presence of historical themes appears to be a later development. In the early 20th century, Richard Cole has surveyed chronologically all the argumentia ex historia petita known to him. This catalogue is of immense utility, but needs updating with the new texts that have emerged from papyri. Still, it emerges that historical themes are less represented in the Latin school than in the Greek context, where around 350 are known. This small number is further reduced in the cases of Latin controversiae relating to figures of Greek history are discounted. A citizen of Olympus, Iphicrates, the sculptor Phidias, and the painter Parrhasius, Cimon, son of Miltiades, in Seneca Controversias, a guest of Olympus, Alexander the Macedonian, Demosthenes, and against Epicrates in Pseudo-Quintilian, Declamation Minores. Themes from Roman history are scarce. Apart from the themes relating to Cicero, we have a Senecan controversia on Lucius Cassius, Metellus, and the rescue of the Palladium, referring to the episode of 251 BCE, and one on the episode of Lucius Quintus Flaminius, who in 184 BCE, during a meal, had a prisoner executed for pleasing his mistress. Sosoria offers a confirmation in this sense. Of the 7 preserved by Seneca the Elder, only 2 relate to episodes of recent Roman history: the assassination of Cicero by Antony's henchman, while another 2 pairs relate to the deeds of Alexander of Macedon and those of the Persian Wars. Entirely different are those themes, exclusively in Seneca the Elder, which is already an important datum, in which some historical reference can be presumed, but only generically and without mentioning precise figures or events. Elvira Miglario has observed that at least 3 controversia evoke a context of civil war and represent proscriptions. These were likely to have been created in the climate immediately following the excesses of the triumvirs, beginning then 43 BCE. What is more, the passages in question are situated after the end of the proscriptions and explore their aftermath and the social problems they bring. A great theme, the proscriptions and their aftermath. What happens when the son leaves to the war, with the mother, with the father, with their sisters, with their friends? Once the most acute phase had passed, several decades later, such questions were perceived as undeniable outdated, which explains their absence in the collections of Pseudo-Quintilian and our friend Calpurnius Flaccus that we will review extensively on the series on reading Roman declamation of Calpurnius Flaccus. It is not easy to account for the absence of historical themes in Roman declamation. Perhaps it comes down to perceptions of the cultural value of historiography in relation to the school rhetoric. So if you are interested into history, you can extract some passages from history from the wars and craft your speeches. Or perhaps It is a fear that figures and situations crystallize in the analytic tradition and congeal in the exemplar tradition did not give rhetoricians enough space to explore, constraining students within rigid boundaries. The difference between Greek and Roman declamation in this respect has been traced to the need to preserve and defend the cultural identity of Greece under the Roman Empire, a demand that would have been much less relevant to Roman rhetoricians for obvious reasons. Much discussion has been devoted to the problem of how free declaimers failed to adapt historical episodes to their needs. In principle, the requirements of historicity would have put quite severe limits on creativity. In practice, declaimers orators to take liberties with history, even to the point of anachronism, and the manuals warns teachers against this. Historiographical tradition certainly imposes strict constraints, as has been observed for Greek rhetoric. A rhetorician could not make the Athenians winners of the expedition to Sicily or paint Critias as anything other than a tyrant. But within those limits, ample space exists for meaningful alteration, much as the tragedians often took license vis-à-vis mythical events. But this is only one aspect of the problem. Declamatory writing of historical events not only entails invention of fictitious circumstances or ad hoc additions of details, but more generally a process of readaptation that colors those events with features of the new literary code within which they have been adopted. Out of this emerge argumenta that are different from other subjects of controversy, only because of their use of proper names or their mention of factual situations, but they could function equally without such details. Seneca's Controversia 7.2 regarding the murder of Cicero is a great example. Legal action is permitted for bad behavior. Cicero defended and won the acquittal of Populus on charges of parricide or patricide. When Cicero was proscribed, Popilius sent by Antony killed him and took his head to Antony. He is accused of bad behavior. As Emmanuel Berti has observed, in this theme proposed to students, we could take out all the proper names, replace Antony with some anonymous Tyrannus, substitute Cicero and Popilius with some generic pair of Patronus and clients, and obtain an equally coherent theme, consistent with other declamations in the Senecan corpus. School rhetoric reveals, in short, a tendency to assimilate themes, whether their origin, to its own conventions and conceptual and juridical frames. It does not hesitate to fabricate fictitious elements in order to make the assimilation more complete. Thus, in the case of the Controversia on the death of Cicero, Seneca states that the declaimers imagine Popilius defended by his future victim against charges of patricide, which in fact Cicero has assisted him in a private case. There have even been some scholars who have doubted the very existence of an assassin named Popilius, with this specific background of relations with his future victim. More interesting is the fact that traces of this declamatory creation can be found in historiographical and biographical texts of the imperial period, evidently influenced by school rhetoric. So this influence is not limited to deforming and adapting figures and historical events, but extends even to giving those events a contour that appears in successive historiographical narratives. Similarly, in Seneca's Controversia relating to Metellus, the Pontifex Maximus, who was blinded after rescuing the statue of Athena from a fire, which only the Vestal virgins had the right to approach. The blindness is in all likelihood an invention of the declaimers, who want the incident to interact with the general principle that the priest be physically whole. And yet in Pliny the Elder, some 40 years after the publication of the Senecan Anthology, this element is taken for granted as an established historical truth, just like the relation between declamation and literature. That between declamation and historiography is a two-way street. In chapters ahead, we return to historical controversia in the perspective of the political value of declamation. For this moment, we will simply to observe that the school themes allude not only to episodes of the Greco-Roman historiographical tradition, but also to individual figures. Latin literature taste, for example, pervades even the practices of rhetoricians. Mark van der Pol has catalogued all the exempla present in Latin declamation, in a contribution that provides a convenient naming scheme. From this study, we easily recognize the recurrence of names familiar to the annalistic tradition, almost always evoked in the most predictable terms. Manlius Torquatus, but also Lucius Brutus, or his severity with his son, Coluncanius or Cincinnatus, for their virtuous poverty, Asclepius and Pompey the Great for their military victories, Gaius Marius or Crassus or Cicero as examples of the mutability of fortune, Cornelia as the exemplary mother, Lucretia or Virginia as models of female chastity, and so on. More interestingly, the perspective is almost always that of mainstream historiography and conservative stripe. Thus the Gracchi are sowers of discord and underminers of the Republic. Rutilius Rufus, persecuted by the Marians, represents an example of a virtuous man, unjustly exiled. And Sulla, unpopular even with his own political party, is a model of cruelty. Beyond the reference to precise historical events or figures, what counts is the vision of history that Latin declamation engenders. A vision that is similar in important aspects to that of historiography in a strict sense. We are referring in particular to its tendency to perceive the present in terms of decadence in respect to a past that normally functions as an exemplar. The trope of conventium sae eculi works in this way, lamenting the crisis of customs and loss of values. Reduced to the stale topos, but still capable of sinking its roots in a vision of history, well established in Roman culture. In some cases, the lament has a more punctual consistency. Thus, in Seneca the Elder Controversia, the rise of the civil wars is linked directly to the growth of wealth, and reference to Rome's recent past is explicit. When we were poor, we knew more tranquil times. We have waged civil wars when we covered the Capitoline in gold. Seneca shares the image of the Aurea Capitolia as a beloved or abhorred symbol of modernity, with all of Augustan poetry, from Virgil to Propertius to Ovid. Similarly, in Minor 349, about a father accused of dementia by his own raptor son for not pardoning him during the 30 days permitted by law, which would save him from capital punishment, as we can see in this extract. If you had come into the hands of the one who cut off his son's head, who also covered himself with glory, or of he whom the opinions of relatives and friends were sufficient, you would have had, I am sure, the time to complain. You would have had the time. I don't say to drag your father to court, but finally to address a request for clemency to him again. This except alludes to the well-known episode of Titus Manlius Torquatus, who in 340 BC had his son of the same name beaten to death. The young Titus had been victorious in a duel, but had fought against the orders of his father as consul. It also alludes to another severe father of the archaic period, who in 480 BC put his son Spurius Cassius to death for aspiring to tyranny after having taken, according to a regular practice, the opinion of an informal council of friends and family. The conclusion of the long tirade is as follows. They were truly courageous men. They were heroes. They remembered that they seared children for the benefit of the Republic, and believed it worthwhile to sacrifice them if this could serve as an example. Not by chance, in the immediately preceding text, his father had called those remote times Feliciora Saecula, just as the declaimer of Seneca's Controversia speaks of Praetoria Tempora, blessed epochs of the past, in which virtue was more widespread than it is today. So as you can see, there are always reflections to the past, to the virtues of the past. Passages like these are found in historians such as Sallust and Livy. Livy includes a passage in which, referring to father-son relationships, he laments the crisis of paternal authorities in his own times, compared with the era of the Second Punic War, and refers precisely to Manlius Torquatus. Moreover, the mayores appear in declamations as the bearers of superior wisdom, especially in the field of legislation, which for obvious reasons is privileged in the context of declamation. Such passages are numerous, and Michael Winterbottom deserves credit for highlighting them. This is the case especially in some passages of Minor 252, where actio inscripti malefici comes into play. That is the act of unwritten wrongdoing, a typical declamatory invention and lacking any correspondence in the real law. Debate on the value of this specific procedure offers occasion to celebrate the prudence of the ancestors. As you can see, if these accusations fall under a specific law that ordains them, accuse me on the basis. But if this is not, why do you raise a procedural exception under the scrupulousness of the ancestors and the refined intellects that put a law into writing? And again, posted on the screen, it seems to me that our ancestors conceived this law with utmost care, knowing that no wisdom is sufficiently great and no forecasting capability so certain as to imagine all the crimes that can be thought of by the mind of miscreants, and to guard against this. With this law, they wanted to place around all wickedness almost a kind of net, so to speak, so that whatever fault escaped the remedies provided by other laws could nevertheless be circumscribed. Even more interesting is the passage utterly ironical in Minor 264, because it deals with the only case of explicit reference to the Roman law, the Lex Boconia, so that the appreciation of its elaboration is understood, and so much recognition of the indigenous legal tradition, you can see on your screen. Now men who are expert in legal processes are here to bring us to an understanding of the law. They want us to believe that the intention of the legislator is not what happens or appears in the letter of the law. Judges remain, however, astonished by their cleverness. They are so superior to our ancestors, those founders of the law, those who thought the laws and rights gave shape to to a still rough popular as to want us to believe that men so lack the ability to express themselves clearly or that they lacked intelligence. The motive occurs elsewhere in nearly identical terms. For example, in minor 279 and in 350, where the Summa Prudentia Majorum is mentioned. Here declamation comes close to the famous passage of Cicero, where the orator, persuasive speech, and the constraint of law is merited without having brought men out of the state of nature, and with having established them in politically organized communities, and to an equally well-known Caesarean text, with the superior sapientia and prudentia of the mayores in the legislative field. The same words used by Pseudo-Quintilian stand out for having established a punishment for patricide, which had been omitted from the laws of Solon, on the naive assumption that such a crime was impossible. As you can see in the text on your screen, our ancestors were much more careful. They understand that there is nothing so sacred that wickedness would not, at some time or another, attempt to violate, and for this reason they conceived a punishment for patricide very different from other punishments. Okay, we're going to divide this session into two parts because it's quite long. So let's finish here part 1. Thank you for listening, hearing, reviewing, meditating, writing. All activity for all this chapter will be posted on the article on the LinkedIn page. So thank you and see you soon. Goodbye.